In February of 2018, Putin signed their next state armament procurement program that outlines their plans to upgrade and modernize their military for the next 10 years. Most of the funding was set to go to the ground forces, to produce things like their T-14 Armata. As Putin said about their SAP 2027, we must always be one step ahead. But 5 years later, instead of seeing hundreds of brand new T-14 tanks fighting in Ukraine, we see these ancient T-55s being sent into the country. The Soviets themselves stopped using that tank over 40 years ago. So what happened? Where are the T-14 Armatas? And how many have they even built? But first, real quick, our sponsor, YouGov. It's a straightforward, easy way to earn some extra cash. And as it feels prices are rising on everything, it's a perfect little boost. Right now, I'm saving up my points for an Amazon gift card, which will come in handy because I recently moved. And it's real simple to do. Again, straightforward, no extra nonsense. Just log in and your most recent research survey is right there waiting for you. And this time, the survey perfectly fits the theme of this video. But it's that quick. It took me less than 2 minutes. And the points are instantly added to my balance. And then actually just for fun while making this, I did another. And just like that, I'm one step closer to getting my gift card. And the cool thing is that your input actually is used to make a difference. So go over and try it for yourself. Tap my link to take surveys and earn cash on YouGov. First, a lot of the details of the T-14 are secret, so finding good, reliable information is hard. But so far, at least on paper, it's a big leap over older Russian tanks. A lot of the improvements and changes have fixed some of the major problems that Russian tanks suffer from, such as its ammo no longer being stored right underneath the crew, which helps prevent a catastrophic cook-off that happens even with non-lethal hits. In the T-14, it's stored in the bustle, and this frees up a lot of space for the crew, which is now completely separate from the turret, which greatly increases their crew survivability. It also has a much more powerful engine of 1,500 horsepower. For its weight, that's about 35 horsepower per ton. Compare that to the T-90's only 15, so it has a lot more power and ability to quickly get up to speed. It also has room for more stored ammo, 32 rounds instead of the T-90's 22. On top of other things, it also has a more powerful main gun. All this, as you can imagine, means the tank is much larger and much heavier than previous generations. Here, with the T-90 for comparison, you can really see the difference. It's massive. It's more on par with, and even larger in size than some Western tanks, like the M1 Abrams here. The tank is being produced at UVZ, a massive factory at the foot of the Ural Mountains, Workshop 30 to be precise, which is Russia's only remaining conveyor assembling tanks. The exact number they've built, and how many are operational and in service is not clear. And you might have seen pictures or videos going all the way back to 2015 of Russia building T-14 tanks and them appearing at the 2015 Victory Day Parade. And from that, therefore, you might assume that they must have a lot by now. But first, you have to have a basic understanding of how Russia's procurement process works. As I mentioned in the very beginning, Russia uses what are called State Armament Procurement Plans, or SAP. These will outline their plans for design, development, testing, and procurement over the next 10 years. The T-14 would have been first included in SAP 2020, and remember, 10 years, so that means it was signed back in 2011. That SAP was actually cut short and replaced in 2018 by SAP 2027, which would match up more with their needs after Crimea and Ukraine, and also the fact that oil prices have dropped so much that they have less money for their budget. When it comes to new vehicles, like the T-14, they first build a series of mock-ups, then several prototypes, which is again what you'll see at those Russian Victory Day parades, then several more prototypes designed for more comprehensive testing and evaluation. And then finally, once everything passes and they're happy with it, they begin serial production. Once the testing vehicles are built, they've been sent to a facility called the 38th Scientific Research Institute. This facility in Kubinka, near Moscow, is specifically for research and testing of armored weapons and equipment. There's actually very little information on this site. In fact, it's funny that Yandex, who often has these cool aerial images, well, they had one of the tank museum that's right next to it, but they then photoshopped out the entire facility, despite the fact that you can actually still see it in the satellite imagery they use. Here, you can see a large site complete with test grounds and tracks for the tanks to be put through. It's a real old facility, and it looks real rundown, but there have been pictures of Armata geolocated to that site. Another place they've appeared, in 2022, while the tank was finally being moved from prototypes into serial production, is the Kazan Tank Command School. There are several videos that were claimed by some of the T-14 supposedly in Ukraine, but those videos were actually taken from the training grounds in Kazan just to the southeast of the school. But speaking of their use in Ukraine, there is still no verifiable proof that they've been there. There were some rumors back in December that T-14 Armata tanks were being used back from the front line, but not proof. Then, earlier this month in July, the Russian government-ran TASS reported that they had been used based on a source that they had. So they likely have, yet in small numbers and in a more experimental role. But based on official statements, the testing and trials did not end until 2021, and in fact they're still making improvements. But then they said that serial production would begin and that 20 pilot batch tanks would be delivered. It's likely that the first unit that would receive the T-14 is the 1st Tank Regiment of the 2nd Motor Rifle Division, 1st Tank Army, just west of Moscow. And interestingly, they're just right down the street from that 38th Scientific Research Facility that I mentioned earlier, just 15 kilometers away. And there's been at least one picture where you can see one there. It's just the very edge of one right here, but it's clearly a T-14. Now, tank regiments vary greatly, especially in Russia, but they can have up to 94 tanks. You can see though that most are not armadas, so if one battalion received them, that would be about 30. So based on all evidence, it seems likely has roughly built 20 to 50 T-14 Armata tanks that they then have in service. And even those are likely still being tested, so not many. It's likely that Russia has also decided to wait and learn lessons from how tanks are being used and destroyed in Ukraine, and then applying those lessons to the T-14 before they really begin mass production. For example, we've seen supposedly much more capable Western tanks, such as the Leopard 2, still getting regularly destroyed on the battlefield. But the vast majority of these are due to anti-tank mines instead of ATGMs and other weapons. Mines are always a huge problem for tanks, regardless of how well armored it is. They can still easily disable a tank's mobility by throwing off its tracks and damaging its wheels. So it could suit Russia well to wait and look into what improvements they can make before beginning to mass produce them. Also, since a war is currently going on, it makes more sense to continue upgrading their existing tanks, which could be done so much more faster than building a brand new, sophisticated tank that's barely out of testing. But, in general, Russia has had a real hard time developing any brand new military systems, and an especially hard time mass producing them. The Su-57, for example, has had endless delays and procurement cut way back. Several new, large naval ships have been planned and then cancelled, and also this T-14 Armata. Originally, over 2,000 were planned to have been produced and active by now. Yet, as we know, only a handful have actually been built. Instead, the vast majority of new weapons are actually just highly upgraded versions of older Soviet systems that they inherited. The Su-30, 32, 33, 34, 35, for example, are all based on the Soviet Su-27. The T-90M is just an upgraded version of the Soviet T-90 and older T-72 tanks. And even the S-400 air defense system is just an upgrade of the S-300. And I'd be willing to bet that you couldn't even tell the difference between the two launchers. But to be fair, building new advanced weapons has become extremely difficult and expensive for everybody. All the complicated electronics, the sensors, and the software has made designing and producing them much more complicated, also much more complex and costly. The US F-35, for example, has had many delays and cost overruns. But the difference is, so far, they've actually got it into mass production, with almost 1,000 built. And Russia relies heavily on arms sales to other countries to be able to afford their own procurement needs. Now estimates vary, and they vary by year, but some 40% of all Russia's manufactured good exports are arms exports. So if they cannot find a country to purchase their equipment, they're going to be in real trouble. And especially now with China's growing arms market cutting into Russia's. But while counting tanks for previous videos, a lot of people asked me if I found any T-14s. Now those tanks are not going to be at those storage reserve bases, because they're so new. And they also have so few of them right now that they could still be stored inside in garages to protect them from the elements. Really, the only time you'll ever catch a glimpse of one in satellite imagery is during testing, training, or like here where they're lined up after the 2022 Russia Victory Day parade in Moscow. And again here, you can really see the size difference between the two Armatas in the middle and the 5 T-90Ms on the right. So, once they have built them in large enough numbers, they're going to be very easy to spot. But even for that image, I had to order one of the most absurd satellite images ever, where here I traced the path of the parade vehicles and then checked it later to find the tanks.